Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, everybody, for not only tuning in as this is being live streamed, but I also want to recognize and give a shout out to all of the media that help us cover this. And over the past 7 months, I know that your world has been flipped upside down as well. But you've consistently worked with all the elected officials and folks in the community to get accurate information out to the public. So I want to recognize that and thank you for the work that you all have been doing throughout all of this. As I get going, I also want to recognize Councilwoman Joanne Ryan, who's with us here today. We work in partnership with the City Council on in so many different ways. And so I really appreciate you being here and really underscoring the message that this is all of us that have to work together to make sure that we keep our community safe. So I want to begin today by just sharing something personal that I hadn't shared or disclosed previously to anyone publicly. And it has to do, of course, with COVID and the devastation that it has wreaked on our entire community. So back in March, at the very beginning of this crisis, we had a bout of COVID in my own family. I, my wife, and my child, thankfully, we've been safe, and we haven't gotten COVID. But my mother, my father, my uncle, and my aunt, they all got sick. And in particular, my mother got extremely sick to the point where we had to call rescue one day, and she was taken to the hospital. My mother ended up spending 2 weeks on a ventilator at Rhode Island Hospital, and we almost thought that we were going to lose her. Thankfully, because of the amazing professionals at Rhode Island Hospital, they saved my mom's life. We thought that we might never see her again, but thankfully, she's still with us. My mother has spent the past 7 months rehabbing and getting better, and thankfully, she's almost back to where she was before. But I wanted to share this message because there are still a lot of folks out there in the community that still say that this sickness is nothing but a bad flu. For a lot of us, thankfully, it doesn't hit us as hard as it does for others. But when it hits hard, this thing is lethal. And it's certainly something that we should protect ourselves from and protect the people around us from, because we never know who's going to get hit hard by it. And so more than anything else, as we're heading into this really strong second wave that's hitting our state right now, we ask everyone to do what you can to not only keep yourself safe, but by keeping yourself safe, you're also keeping folks around you, your loved ones and your friends, safe as well. So I ask everyone, please do everything that you can to be safe. Now, as we go into the second wave, we're concerned, we're looking at the data every single day, and we're concerned about two particular areas where we're seeing that they're the cause of most of the spread in our community. The first is in small private social gatherings, these backyard barbecues, families getting together. And in those situations, collectively, we have let our guard down. We've taken our masks off. We've hugged and kissed our loved ones that we have been away from for a long time. And all of that is understandable. But at the same time, we know through contact tracing that that's been a source of a great deal of spread in our community. So that's one area of concern. The other area of concern are the so-called or quote-unquote super spreader events, large social gatherings that are still happening, either in private settings or out in public. And we have to be mindful to limit the spread in those situations as well. So what we're doing here today is issuing a set of not only advice and guidance, but also new requirements that we're requiring of folks throughout our city. I understand that the last 7 months have been extremely difficult for folks at a personal level and also for so many of our small businesses. So what we have tried to do through these new requirements and guidance is navigate that balance as best as possible of being tailored specifically to the areas where we're seeing spread, but also supporting our families and supporting our businesses as much as possible. Because if they can't continue to thrive and go on, then what's this really all for and what's it really all about? So the requirements and the guidance that I give go into effect this coming Sunday, and I appeal to everyone's sense of responsibility in our city and to help us all keep each other safe. So the first requirement, or the first advice, we know that the state has a limit on social gatherings on the state level at 10, and that applies to everyone. So we are giving additional guidance to folks to please do everything you can to either limit these social gatherings to 5 people, or do everything that you can to stay within your own household unit. Remember that this is advice and guidance. This is not something that we would police, and it's not something that we can police. And this truly requires on every single person just taking the responsibility personally and doing their part. And again, this is guidance. There are a lot of people throughout the city and the state that look for us for guidance on what to do in these situations. And given all the conversations we've had with public health and public safety experts, the guidance that we give is do everything you can to stay within your household unit. And when you do get together socially, please do everything that you can to limit them to no more than 5 people. The second requirement, and this is a requirement, the state has a limit that for indoor events, there can be no private social gatherings of more than 25 people. And for outdoor gatherings, there can't be any of more than 75 people. So we are keeping those same limits and requirements in place. However, we're adding an additional step to make sure that we can prevent super spreader events. So for any indoor gatherings above 10 people, you will be required to go through our city's permitting process, where we will review to make sure that you have a social distancing and a safety plan in place. Again, the limit of the number of people allowed at the state level is 25, and that remains. However, if your group is going to have more than 10 people get together indoors, you have to get a special permit from the city. For outdoor events, the limit at the state level is 75 people. But for any group above 25 for outdoor events, you have to get a special permit from the city in order to make sure that you have the right plans and procedures in place to keep everyone socially distant and to keep everyone safe. And again, the concern here is to limit the amount of super spreader events where this virus can just spread and continue to take hold in our community. These are all targeted interventions. We've learned a lot about the virus. We've learned how it spreads. We've learned how to treat it over the past 7 months. And with these targeted interventions, we believe we can help to slow down the spread and eventually flatten and reverse the trajectory that we're on today. In addition to that, for anyone transacting or doing business in City Hall, we want you to know that City Hall will still be open for forward-facing functions. So if you have any business to transact in City Hall, you can still do so. However, we are reducing our in-office City Hall staff even further. We're allowing all of our staff to telecommute whenever that is possible. If you have any questions or any issue that you have to resolve here at City Hall, you can always just reach out to my office by dialing 311 and ask whether it can be done remotely, whether it can be done online or via telephone, or whether it truly requires you coming in. If we can save you the trip and keep you safe and keep our employees safe at the same time, then let's do that. And so please just dial 311 and we are here to help you. I know that everyone is really exhausted. COVID fatigue is a real thing, and it's been really hard on us and so many people in the community. And especially as we go into the holiday season, I know it's going to be especially difficult. I can tell you that my favorite holiday is Thanksgiving. I love getting together with my family and celebrating with all of them. However, this year, we're just not going to be able to do it in the way that we have in the past. And I ask everyone to please make Thanksgiving plans that take into account as much as possible the guidance that we're offering to keep you and your family members safe. Please, as much as possible, use the online tools. If you can connect via WhatsApp, if you can connect via Zoom or Skype, or just on the telephone in conversation, please do so. Check in on loved ones, make sure folks aren't feeling lonely, and be there to comfort them as much as possible. But I ask every family to please make plans to not have large Thanksgiving gatherings this year as much as we would want to. It's just not safe to do so. Now is a time that we all have to pull together in the same way that we did back in March, April, and May, in the way that we flattened and lowered the curve. We've done it before as a state, and I'm sure that we can do it again, but it's going to take every single one of us doing our part. Please remember to wash your hands, to wear a mask, keep your distance, and to observe as much of the statewide stay-at-home advisory that's currently in effect every weekday from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. and from Saturdays from 10:30 to 5 a.m. I also want to remind folks to continue supporting our families, many of whom are facing food insecurity at this time. And remember that all Providence youth can grab free grab-and-go meals Mondays through Thursday at after school hours at many of our tented locations at each of the 11 recreation centers throughout our city. So we're all pulling together and doing what we can. And the only way we're going to defeat this and win is by everybody pulling together. We've done it before, and I'm asking all of our residents to pull together, and let's do it again. So with that, I'm going to pass it to my colleague in government, Council Majority Leader Joanne Ryan, to share a few thoughts. I'm sorry, I believe you're muted, Councilwoman. Can we unmute Councilwoman Ryan? Patty? Here we go. I think you're on, Councilwoman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you for sharing your personal story. On behalf of the Providence City Council, we ask our neighbors to wear a mask, follow recommended guidelines, and most importantly, recognize that we are all in this together. Providence has been and continues to be one of the hardest hit communities by this ongoing pandemic. Our numbers are rising exponentially. We must do everything in our power to keep our city running, but we must also balance the safety of our residents and city employees. We understand how difficult the holidays are going to be this year for many who can't see their extended families. But folks, this health crisis is real. We need to all do our part to protect each other. For us to stop this spike, we must all work together. And in doing so, we will indeed save lives. Again, please wear a mask, follow the guidelines, and be well and be safe. Thank you again, Mr. Mayor.
Excellent. Thank you so much, both. I really appreciate it. At this point, if anyone has any questions, if you could just go ahead and use the raise my hand feature, and I will call on you in the order in which you raise your hand. If you have any technical difficulties, please feel free to just shoot me a quick chat as well. And it seems like our first one is going to be from Steph. Steph, do you want to unmute yourself and turn on your camera?
Hi, sorry, it said the host wouldn't let me unmute myself. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Mayor, I'm glad to hear that your mom is doing better now. Can you explain why you did not choose to go the route of Central Falls and restrict restaurants further at this point?
All right. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So it's something that we did consider. But Central Falls is going through a different situation right now. They have the highest incident rate in the entire state. And also their restaurants, I think are different than what we're seeing here. Many of their restaurants in Central Falls are restaurants that are primarily used by Central Falls residents. And it's a different situation here in Providence. First of all, we're not seeing the numbers here in Providence of people infected as they're seeing in Central Falls. And at the same time, we have a different community here, or different collection of restaurants. We have several, if not hundreds of restaurants that people travel from outside of the city into the city every day to visit. And, we could, shut down the restaurants. But if we shut down the restaurants, many folks would just visit restaurants somewhere else, or our residents would visit restaurants elsewhere. And so, it's not just about, what makes sense in the abstract, but also what makes sense given the way that, real people make decisions. And then the last piece is, we track the data and the evidence that we have very, very closely. And all of the contact tracing data that we have seen tells us that spread inside of restaurants is not the issue. What we're seeing is the issue are these private social gatherings in backyards, right? These family gatherings or friendly gatherings in people's backyards and people coming together where you let your guard down. That's one area. And then we're always very concerned about super spreader events. So the evidence is telling us that that's where the problems are. And so we tailor, our requirements and our guidance to our community specifically to what the data is telling us.
Is that the next step potentially if the numbers keep climbing exponentially, or is that not really on the table?
I think it depends. So it depends what the evidence is telling us. If we start receiving information and see data that spread is happening at these levels inside of our restaurants, well then we'll consider it. But we're always going to follow the data and make our decisions based on that. So it really depends on what the data tells us. If the data is telling us that there is spread happening in other settings, well then we always reserve the possibility of coming back and putting additional requirements, giving additional restrictions, or giving additional guidance in those other areas. But again, it depends on what the data is telling us. It's equipped us with all of this information that allows us to make better, more effective decisions, so that it's not so much a sledgehammer approach, but it's a scalpel approach, and that's what we're doing here. I also want to emphasize that I've been talking to so many small businesses, and remember that these small businesses, these are usually the business owner's only source of income, and it's incredibly hard under normal circumstances. It's just infinitely more difficult under these circumstances. And before we step in and make their job of surviving even harder, we want to make sure that the requirements that we're imposing are aligned with what the data is telling us is the problem. We're a city of restaurants here in the city of Providence. We're known for that. That's part of what makes us so special. And I'm concerned about a lot of these places not making it to the other side. And if they don't make it to the other side, we'll be worse off as a city. So I want to do everything that we can to support our restaurants while we're going through this, and so long as we can do it safely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Thank you, Mayor. All right, our next question is from Lindsay. Do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you so much, Patty. Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple quick questions when it comes to this permitting process for catered events. How long exactly will this process take for these businesses who may have small gatherings or small events happening? How long will it take them to get that permit?
Yeah, it should be a fairly quick process. And actually, I can turn it over to Stephanie Fortunato on my team that can speak specifically to it. But it was very important for us as we impose this additional requirement, and that we make it as easy as possible for folks. So all of this can be handled online, and they can simply call us as well and we can help them through this process. But, we want to make it, we want to walk that balance as best we can. We want to make it as simple for folks, because I know that life is just hard and difficult as it is. But at the same time, how can we ensure that it's going to be safe and we can avoid these super spreader events? So I'll let Stephanie fill in any details there.
Thanks, Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. So we have a system in place for reviewing special events permits. The city service team, which is an interdepartmental team that is administering this process, meets weekly. They have a virtual Zoom meeting weekly. And so applicants will go to the online portal, submit an application, and we are reviewing those applications quite quickly and getting them on the next city service meeting agenda. The application process itself is fairly straightforward. It is an online process. And so even though it will be new for some of these applicants, it is a fairly straightforward process that we have been using now for several years, which is exciting. And the end of this is really to help make sure that the events that are being planned, the ones that are already in the works, we'll be working very closely with the applicants, with the event organizers, to make sure that those events really are following the public health guidelines and that the events can be successful. These celebrations really these are the important moments in our lives quite often. So we want to make sure that those events can still take place, but within the guidelines that the public health conditions are recommending at this point.
So start to finish this permit process, maybe a week or so, it'll take someplace? Okay. And yes. You say that you're working with these places who may already have things planned. For instance, say you have something, a small gathering, a 25-person gathering at a licensed catering venue planned for next Friday, the Friday after this goes into effect. Will you be working with them, and will they be required to get this permit, or is it more so events like this down early December, late December? How long do we go with this?
As soon as this goes into effect, so Sunday, this is going into effect, and we will be working with all of the events happening after that. They will be required to come through the special events permitting process. There's a category called Other, and they can check that box, and we will work with them on the details of their event. We're using the Reopening Rhode Island event control template, which really asks applicants to consider all the different aspects. So how many people will be there? Will you be requiring face coverings, sanitation, and considerations about health safety? So the event control template is a really thorough planning document. And so we'll work with them to make sure that those aspects are being considered within the context of the public health guidelines.
Okay, and just my last follow-up on this real quickly. The person who has to apply for this permit, is it the client, the person who's having this gathering, or is it the venue itself, the business itself? Or does it not matter?
I think the licensed caterer would be the applicant for the permit. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and Lindsay, I'll just add to that the distinction that I think helps to explain where the problem areas are structured versus unstructured. So if there's a structure to the way that an event is operating, you can have a good amount of people there and still not put people at risk. So for example, we're not seeing high level spreads at restaurants. That's because many restaurants have been following many of the restrictions and guidelines. They've been distancing the tables. Many of them have the plastic coverings. People have been wearing their masks. They're required. So there's a structure that's put in place. And even for larger events, so I went to Farm Fresh this past weekend, their winter farmers market. There was a whole flow to it. They had the windows open. There was a lot of very clean and natural airflow in there. So there's a way that we can pull off many of these events safely. But I think that what we've seen in many unstructured events, such as the backyard barbecues, the weddings that have taken place, that's where people let their guard down. There's no fixed plan for how you come in, where you walk, how you distance. And we want to make sure that whoever's organizing these events, that we're providing support to them and that they know that, you know, there are certain things you can do to make sure that you can have the event, but it can be done without putting anyone at risk. So I think that this structured versus unstructured distinction, you know, helps get at, you know, what we're trying to do here today, bring more structure even to those private social gatherings so that they can be safe.
Is there anything that would put someone in jeopardy of being denied a permit?
No, absolutely. So if they just don't have a plan in place or refuse to have a plan in place, absolutely. So, you know, that, I hope that's not the case. Really what we're doing is we're providing this additional step, but offering a number of different services and supports to those folks. Because at the end of the day, you know, I'm convinced that everyone wants to keep all of their guests safe. So, you know, this is something that can only help ensure that safety and provide more support to what they want to accomplish.
Thank you.
Thank you both. All right, we have another question from Madeline. Do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Yes, can you hear me? Great. Hi,
Yeah.
Mayor. I'm just wondering if you've been able to pinpoint or identify specifically any of these super spreader events that have taken place in the city in recent weeks.
No, not here in the city. Although there have been some really well-publicized super spreader events throughout the country, and you know, we want to make sure that we're taking proactive steps to prevent them here. And so I have not heard of these super spreader events here in the city, but you know, the concern is there; it can happen anywhere. So we want to be proactive about that.
Thank you.
Excellent.
You know, and I do want to add that, you know, this is in addition to many of the restrictions that the state has imposed. So, for example, you know, their contact tracing data was telling them that, you know, after 10 o'clock or after 10:30 at night at restaurants and bars, that's where people were letting their guard down, and a lot of people were getting infected. And so they also tailored their new restrictions specifically to what the data was telling them. So, you know, during these hours at these venues, you know, there certainly seems to have been a great deal of community spread. So I applaud the state in coming up with a very tailored approach to respond to what the data was telling them. So, you know, those are proactive steps, and these are additional proactive steps. We're always on guard, and we're always concerned about these potential super spreader events, and hopefully we can limit them and perhaps even eliminate them.
Thank you both. I got a question from Telemundo. They're having some technical difficulties, but Mayor, if you could just give them a soundbite of our announcement today in Spanish, it would be really helpful.
Okay. Bueno, gracias por cubrir este evento. Y hoy estamos hablando de lo difícil que estamos en esta situación de COVID. Vemos que los números siguen subiendo, y igual que lo hicimos en marzo, abril y mayo, cuando todos tomamos responsabilidad y hacemos lo necesario, podemos bajar los números y darle vuelta a esta curva. Y es lo que tenemos que hacer hoy en día también. Es por eso que estamos dando un consejo y el aviso a la comunidad entera, que por favor hagan todo lo posible para mantener el tamaño de su grupo cuando se reúnan socialmente a 5 personas, y preferiblemente a las 5 personas de su hogar. Yo sé que eso será imposible para muchas personas, pero recuerden que cualquier vez que estén en situaciones públicas reunidas de gente, tomen todas las medidas para cuidarse a ustedes y a las personas que los rodeen. Pero le pedimos que hagan lo posible para mantener no más de 5 personas con quien se reúnan en estas situaciones sociales en lugares privados. También tenemos mucho miedo de estos eventos que se llaman super spreader, los eventos grandes donde resultan muchas personas infectadas. El Estado tiene límite. Si el evento es adentro, pues el límite es de 25 personas, pero si es un evento afuera, el límite es de 75 personas. En la ciudad vamos a observar esos mismos límites pero vamos a añadir un requerimiento adicional, y es que para un evento de más de 10 personas adentro, en un sitio de adentro, necesitan un permiso oficial de la ciudad para ese evento. Y lo que haremos nosotros es revisar su plan para asegurar de que haya estructura y que haya un plan para mantener a todos seguros. También para eventos que ocurren en el exterior, el límite queda siendo 75, igual que el estado, pero para cualquier evento donde van a haber más de 25 personas en el exterior, afuera, también necesitan usar este proceso de permiso oficial de la ciudad de Providence. Cualquier pregunta, siempre pueden llamar a mi oficina al número 311. Y estamos tomando estas medidas porque estamos viendo un incremento muy alto en los casos. Y segundo, también estamos revisando la información y todos los datos y nos dicen que estas reuniones informales, pequeñas en casa, es donde hemos bajado la guardia y vemos muchas infecciones. Y también sabemos de que en estos eventos grandes, lo que se dice el super spreader, siempre hay peligro de que se haga rienda el spread de este virus. Así que le pido a todos que por favor hagamos nuestra parte de un sentido de responsabilidad, no solo personal, pero de uno al otro. Y es así que vamos a superar esta crisis.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor. And then we have another question from John.
Hi, Mayor. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Hey, thanks very much. So as you mentioned, there are already a number of advisories and restrictions meant to kind of contain the spread of this virus. I'm wondering, and I'm, I assume every little, change or restriction can help and make some sort of impact. But I'm wondering if you have any sort of estimates on the dent that the catered events permitting, may have. Do you guys have any estimates for how many of these sort of smallish catered events were taking place already? I guess I'm asking, do you have any sense of what sort of impact this will have?
It's hard to know, but I'll tell you the thinking behind this. On the one hand, it's raising awareness and raising concern among the general public, and doing our part to alert folks that we're reaching crisis critical levels once again. And, there seems to be this disconnect that many people have. I think there are a lot of people that are committed to doing the right thing. And, but you hear about, generally the rise in cases and the concern and the danger that exists. But at the same time, there's sort of this disconnect. You may get invited to a social gathering and you feel comfortable going without putting those two together. And so what I want to do here today, and we'll continue to do, is try to connect that as much as possible to the point where we start off with everyone, taking personal responsibility for keeping our entire community safe. And in doing that, that's why, reducing the advice and guidance of the number of people that you should come together to be just 5. And I think it's very simple when we think about when we think about staying within our own household. Keep it to just 5. I remember when we had that early on in the pandemic back in March and April. It was a very simple and easy thing, simple sort of guidance for folks to follow. And there are a lot of folks that do look to us for guidance. So I hope that everyone internalizes that and is very mindful of who they're around. And anytime that they're not around those, say, 5 or so people or the people in their immediate household, that they be on guard and take additional precautions. And the second reason why we're doing this is because we always have to be on guard with these super spreader events. We've seen them happen throughout the country, and they can happen anywhere. So instead of just waiting for them to happen and quarantining and isolating folks, let's just get the message out there as much as possible. Again, putting that personal responsibility on folks. We're here to support and we're here to help you. You can still have many of these events, but we're here to help you and make sure that it happens safely so that you and your friends and your loved ones don't get sick as well. And so really this is about both being proactive, being responsive to the data, and also raising awareness that, you know, this is real and we each have to take responsibility for keeping each other safe.